Laila Peak is a striking mountain located in the Karakoram Range in the Gilgit-Baltistan region of Pakistan. Standing at a height of exactly 20,000 feet at its summit, Laila Peak isn't one of the tallest peaks amongst the many gargantuan mountains of the Karakoram Range. However, Laila Peak has garnered some notoriety thanks to its spear-like, intimidating appearance, and, most notably, its sharply slanted northwestern face, which sports a slope of 45 degrees, with the peak being described by one unsuccessful summit team as, quote, one of the most amazing mountains we have ever seen. Like a needle, it points straight up into the sky, they said. True to its frightening appearance, an ascent of Laila Peak is a challenging endeavor, as any ascent of its steeply slanted slopes requires high-level technical mountaineering abilities, as the ascent is rife with pitches of both highly difficult ice and rock climbing throughout. Furthermore, a potential attempt at ascending Laila Peak is also a highly dangerous affair as well, as summit hopefuls will contend with numerous hazards throughout their climb, including the omnipresent threat of avalanches on its steep slopes, as well as the threat of falling ice from one of the peak's many massive overhanging seracs, which is combined with the additional hazard of being struck by fast-falling debris from rock slides as well. Thus, if you've watched any of my other videos about similar, highly dangerous and difficult to ascend, but lesser-known peaks, such as Malubiting, Ultar Sar, or Ladyfinger Peak, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that Laila Peak sports a sparse climbing history, as such ascents are only appealing to a small demographic of the wider mountaineering community, climbers sporting top-level technical skills who are also very risk-tolerant. However, even when compared to the aforementioned summits, Laila Peak's climbing history has been exceptionally poorly documented, and as a result, many of the claimed successful ascents of the peak have been disputed over the years, and Laila Peak holds the rather unique distinction of being a peak that has been successfully summited before, with no widely attributed first ascent, as seemingly whomever did make the first ascent of the peak was unaware of their accomplishment, or the true first ascent has been obfuscated amidst the many false claims of such made throughout the years, and even the peak's height was the subject of highly contentious debate all the way up until the year 2003. While Laila Peak largely relished in relative obscurity within the mountaineering community within the 20th century, the peak would see a surge of interest in the 2000s, specifically from ski-mountaineers, as the relatively featureless, steep, slab-like northwestern face of the peak presents a potential ski slope unique in its overall massive size, steepness, and elevation. In late May of 2016, a four-man Italian expedition team consisting of a man named Carlo Cossi, a man named Zeno Ciccone, a man named Enrico Mossetti, and a man named Leonardo Camelli arrived at the base of the Gondogoro Glacier to attempt an ascent of Laila Peak's infamous northwestern face, followed by a subsequent ski descent of the face. Over the following few days, the climbers would acclimatize to the high altitude while they planned their potential route, and they would subsequently set their advanced base camp for their attempt at an altitude of 5,350 meters, from which they would attempt to make a straight shot for the summit. On the morning of June 9th, 2016, the team awoke at advanced base camp to find that the weather conditions for their ascent attempt were seemingly ideal, and soon after began their ascent. As the morning hours faded into the afternoon, the 4 men were on pace to reach the summit later that afternoon, just as they had planned. However, as the afternoon further progressed and the men had reached an altitude of 5,946 meters, just 150 meters below the summit, they would be faced with a difficult decision, as they found that the snow conditions just beneath the summit were troubling, as the snow had grown increasingly deep and loose as they ascended, and the team reasoned that not only were these snow conditions not ideal for skiing, but also potentially posed a high risk of the men triggering a massive, sweeping avalanche down the steep northwestern face of Laila Peak. After the men deliberated on whether to continue towards the summit for a short while, they all agreed that they would forgo their summit bid, despite being tantalizingly close to having reached it, and would instead begin their ski descent from an altitude of 5,946 meters. Now, if you're unfamiliar with ski mountaineering, particularly on larger peaks, it's important to know that these descents are hardly comparable to ordinary backcountry skiing or skiing at, say, a ski resort, as descents on slopes of such magnitude are rather slow and meticulous affairs, as gaining too much downwards momentum will assuredly result in death, either from an unarrestable fall at high speeds or simply from skiing off a cliff. The latter is so likely, in fact, that almost no full ski descents of large mountains can be completed successfully without circumnavigating traversal sections, which further set these descents apart from traditional downhill skiing. These traversal sections are essentially mountaineering on skis, where narrow and otherwise unskiable portions of the descent are meticulously and precariously navigated by the skier, almost always while flanked by steep drop-offs, with the incredible circumnavigation of the Messner Traverse during the first ski descent of K2 by Andrzej Bargiel serving as a prime example of a particularly harrowing traversal section during a ski descent. As the 4 Italian skiers made their descent of the northwestern face of Laila Peak, the men would reach one such traversal section during their descent just below their advanced base camp at an altitude of 5,350 meters. The men would begin the process of making their way across a thin band of rock, flanked by steep drop-offs of hundreds of meters, with each of the men making their way across it in a trance-like, intense focus, as, since the men were unroped, a single mistake could result in any of their demises. Unfortunately, as the men were making their way across this traversal section, tragedy would suddenly strike when 27-year-old Leonardo Camelli crossed his skis as he was traversing it, subsequently causing him to lose his balance as his teammates watched in horror as he plummeted 400 meters down the steep, mixed rock and ice terrain beneath them to his death. Fortunately, the other 3 members of the Italian expedition team would successfully complete the traversal and the rest of their ski descent without further incident. Undoubtedly exhausted from their arduous ascent and subsequent ski descent, regardless, after completing their descent, the 3 climbers immediately made their way back up Laila Peak slopes to retrieve the body of Leonardo Camelli, and were able to successfully recover his remains from the mountainside, hauling it all the way back to the safety of base camp before finally making a satellite phone call to the outside world to inform them of the results of their attempt and the tragedy that had occurred during their descent. In wake of his passing, Leonardo Camelli was widely mourned throughout the Italian mountaineering community and is fondly remembered by many within it as a talented climber, skier, and photographer whose life was cut tragically short during his final, fateful descent. Thank you all for watching.